So the other day I was listening to episode 14 of the CSS Podcast with Una Kravitz and Adam Argyle. And Adam mentioned something I found very thought-provoking, which was that you can apply CSS Flexbox layouts to the pseudo-elements of an HTML element. And I didn't know if he was talking about giving the pseudo-element a Flexbox item status or actually giving it its own Flexbox layout. I think both approaches are actually fascinating, and I think we can actually use them together, so I wanted to take a quick look. So to demonstrate this, I have this div element here. I have a list of people, each with their own div, and you see here that I have this data initials. And what we're going to do is use the attr, or attribute function, in CSS to extract the attribute value here, and then we're going to apply it to a pseudo-element within this div using the content property. And then we're going to apply Flexbox layout to that pseudo-element to give it sort of a circular avatar-like look and feel. So let's look at the browser to see what it is we're trying to do. So if we jump over to the browser, you can see here I have my list of names, and next to each name is this avatar-like value, or avatar-like element, and you can see the initials here are being centered both horizontally and vertically within that pseudo element, and we're going to be able to center it using the CSS Flexbox layout. But then the pseudo element itself is also going to be a Flexbox item in the larger element, which allows us to vertically center it along with the name of the person itself. So let's take a look at how this is working. So if we scroll up to the CSS, first let's look at the person. So we can see that the person itself, the div, has display flex and a line item center. And what that's going to allow us to do is two things. One, it's going to apply an implicit Flexbox item status to the pseudo element, and then it's going to allow us to vertically center the name and the avatar itself. But if we then look, we also have the person before selector, which allows us to apply CSS to the pseudo element, the before pseudo element. And you'll notice that the before pseudo element is going to generate its content based on the initials, the data initials attribute, but then it's also going to receive its own Flexbox layout. And then we're going to be using the align items and the justify content CSS properties to center the content within the dimensions of the pseudo element. Now, the really cool thing about Flex layout is that when you apply display flex to an element, any text nodes that are direct descendants of that element get an implicit item wrapper, which means that those text nodes becomes items within the Flexbox layout, which gives them default flex values. Like the default for flex, for example, is 0, 1 auto, which means it doesn't grow, it can shrink, and it sizes to the dimensions of the content itself. And then this is just regular CSS styling. But what we can see is that all of this comes together to allow us to center this content. So now if we look here, right, we can see here's our before element, and you can see that it has display flex, right, align item center. Now we could change this to say like align items flex start, and you can see the initials now float up to the top of that pseudo element rendering. We could go flex end, right, but we're going to use center. So by applying the CSS Flexbox layout to the pseudo element, we're giving the content property, right? We're giving, where's my content? Am I just not, oh, there it is. That's weird. Oh no, sorry, I'm thrown because these aren't alphabetically aligned all the time. Anyway, we can see here that the content here is being given an implicit flex item wrapper, which allows us to align it using the item properties, align items, justify content, so on and so forth. Now, the person also has flex layout, which means that the pseudo element and the person's name, which is a text node, which means that because it's a direct descendant of a flex layout, it gets an implicit flex item wrapper, which is what allows us to center these things, right? So now we could go in here, and again, we could do something like flex start, and you can see the names all bubble up to the top. We could do flex end, they all bubble up down to the bottom, but again, we're just going to go flex center. And what's so cool about Flexbox layout is like it just works so freaking easily, right? So even as I change the heights of these things, you can see that the initials continue to remain center because they're using the align items and the justify content. It's just so freaking easy. I love CSS Flexbox so much. Anyway, I just thought this was a really interesting technique and something that I wanted to experiment with a little bit. I've never actually used the attribute function before in CSS, and I have to say there is like something really elegant about the fact that we don't have to jam some additional spans in here to get the initials to show up. There's a little bit more complexity in terms of the CSS. There's maybe a little bit more magic from a reader's point of view, but there is just like a clean elegance to the code, which I'm really, really digging. And yeah, I just love CSS Flexbox. Thinks it's my go-to layout tool. I still have to support IE11, so I don't necessarily reach for CSS Grid yet. And Flexbox really just makes it happen as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, thanks to the CSS Podcast for the inspiration, and hopefully some of this was interesting.